right, here we go.
Brought to you by My Sheets. Buy My Sheets.
No, brought to you by JackMurphyLive.com. Hey, everybody, it is Jack Murphy, and I am here at the One America News headquarters, studio, bureau in Washington, D.C. with the one and only Jack Posobiec. Jack, how are you doing?
You know, I'm doing well. It's interesting to say because I'm not actually the one and only anymore because I've got Jack Posobiec Jr. now. I've got him. Oh gosh,
that's exactly right.
And so it's amazing, you know, having your first kid because it's like the future just coming at you, right? So I'm competing with him almost
already.
Like, how much can I get done before it's his turn to take over?
Oh man, those father-son narratives, they stretch out for a long time. Watch out.
They do.
Jack,
really do.
Did you change your name legally to Jack Posobiec Sr.?
Well, so my legal name, and I guess we're going to dox myself.
Dox
so
it.
I'll just
Do
dox
it.
right?
Are you sure?
I'm sure.
Oh my
I'm
God.
totally sure. My legal name is not Jack.
What is it?
John.
Get out of here.
I'm a Jack John.
Mine too.
I'm a Jack John. You're a Jack John?
I'm a Jack John.
I never knew you were a Jack John.
Well, I'm actually a John Jack.
Well, yeah, no, you're John Jack. No, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. But
Yeah.
you go by Jack, so you're a Jack John.
That's exactly right. My grandfather's name was John Murphy.
That's an awesome name.
And everybody called him Jack.
There you go.
So here I am, Jack Murphy.
So I'm John the Third.
Oh my God.
Oh yeah.
So is baby Jack, or is he John the Fourth?
He is John the Fourth. Oh, absolutely. Are you kidding me?
This is exclusive breaking news, ladies and gentlemen.
He's John the Fourth. But however, I'm the first one who's gone by Jack.
I see.
Right, and then my grandfather, because he was the first Posobiec born in America, at least male, and so he was more of a Jan Posobiec, but it's John in English.
Got it.
The anglicized kind of version. So
got it.
I'm the first Jack, so that's why I can say he's Jack Jr.
Jack Jr.
because he's the second
and
Jack.
John the Fourth.
So he is Jack Jr. and John the Fourth.
From where are you from? Where's your family from?
Philadelphia.
No. The background.
From Poland. From
Poland.
Yeah.
So John the Fourth from Poland.
Oh yes.
Sounds like he's got big things in his future.
Many, many things. If the Ottomans try to cross the gate again, we're going to be ready.
I think Pope. He's got a good Pope name.
It's a very good Pope name. It's a solid Pope name. And we need a good, us Catholics, we need a good Pope right about now.
Well, I don't know enough about that to comment sensibly, so I'm just going to sidestep that one about the Pope. But I just want to say thanks for taking the time to do this. We've been talking about doing this for several months. And you and I met for the first time. Can you believe it now? It's been like 3 years almost, maybe more. We met at the Deplorable. So what was that, like January 2017, I suppose?
Yeah, January 2017. So it's been about 2.5 years.
Yeah.
It's going on 3.
Right. It seems like,
But it's interesting when you think about the amount of stuff that's happened between now and then that feels like it was 2 lifetimes ago. I've gone through 2 lifetimes of stuff. But when you look at it on a calendar, 2.5 years, that's like not even high school was only.
Well, right. I would have finished 1 year of college in that time.
Right. Well, you.
Well, I think that's a lot about what I want to talk about today, which is sort of all the stories and the processes and the transformations and the growth and the experiences that you've had over these last few years. Because, you didn't wake up in 2015 working as a news correspondent, or I'm not sure what your official title is here, but working on television, talking about politics all day and interviewing people, and working behind the scenes and out front, politically speaking as well. And so where were you? What were you doing 2014, 2015?
2014, 2015, I spent a significant amount of time deployed with the United States Navy in an intelligence capacity to various points of the Asia-Pacific theater under the PACOM command, working with intelligence collectors, signals collectors, and studying our adversaries and opponents in that arena, trying to understand and continuing my understanding of Asia-Pacific and relaying that information back to military leaders and political leaders here in Washington, D.C.
So you were in the Navy as an intelligence, I don't know what your rank was, but
intelligence officer.
You were an intelligence officer in the United States Navy.
That's right.
And when did you enlist or sign up? Or
I originally enlisted 2009.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
Okay. And where did you go to college?
Went to college at Temple University, Philadelphia.
Oh, okay, nice. So you went from Temple straight into the Navy.
No. I did everything backwards. My whole life story is backwards. I did college. Then I was like volunteering on campaigns and stuff. I was like your typical, basic bro, college Republican guy for a while. Then I had this really interesting opportunity to go do my last semester as a study abroad in Shanghai, in China. So I went and did that.
What year was that?
That's 2007.
Okay.
So 2007, I moved to Shanghai, and it's my last semester. And my mother was very upset because I only bought a one-way ticket to Shanghai.
Smart.
And she goes, "You are gonna, come back at the end of this." And I said, "Well, I'm gonna graduate, and maybe I'll visit, different countries in the area, check out Vietnam, check out Philippines, travel around China, see what it's like." I ended up not coming home for 2 years.
Nice.
Well,
Perfect.
Well, I didn't move home. I did visit once or twice, and
Right.
like Christmas and all. And then my family came and visited me a few times as well. But I ended up staying and living and working in China, essentially for the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai for about 2 years.
No kidding.
Yeah, and then it was after that I moved home. During that time, I acquired Mandarin language ability, so I can.
Ni hao.
怎么样?
I've exhausted my
very
Chinese
well,
there.
very well.
And shesha. That's it. That's all I got.
不用谢.
Okay.
So, really focused on learning the language, learning the culture, learning the history, the politics, the business, trying to help, our businesses, U.S. businesses get in. Worked with a lot of companies, a lot of ones that people know, IMAX, Hershey's, Disney. I worked with Disney a lot. I helped actually do some of the really initial plans for the Disney World Shanghai that just opened a few years back. But this is, going way back then.
Wow.
And because at the time, the Shanghai Party chairman was who he was, we ended up getting to meet him a few times, and then he's gone on to do bigger and better things on the Chinese side. So during that time period, the Shanghai Party chairman was a guy by the name of Xi Jinping, and now he's gone on to become the president of all of China.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you had direct interaction with him?
Limited interaction. Yeah, more with his staff and his entourage.
Right.
I used to think of him as sort of the Chinese Tony Soprano. He's
Right.
very much like powerful guy. Even
Right.
back then, you knew he was on his way to the top.
I can't imagine the power structures and dynamics and institutions in China. I mean, it's when you think about just the sheer number of people there, and I know it's not divided up evenly, but if you think about it, there's like 1,000 cities with 1 million people in China, which there isn't. But like, imagine each one of those cities, which each of them with their layers of power and authority, and gangsters and party members.
In China, if you're 1 in 1 million, that means there's 1,000 people like you. Right?
That's tough, man.
And Shanghai itself has 25 million people in it.
Jeez.
One city.
Jeez.
It is their largest city, and depending on how you count it, it's the largest city in the world. But it's, having gone from living in the largest city in the world for years, I enjoy my space now.
Yeah.
I enjoy my personal space. I live on a lake now. I love it.
I can imagine. So what? I just like a total tangent, real quick. Like to the young guys who are listening to this, if you had the chance to study abroad, man, absolutely go do it. You have
100% do it.
You have no chance, no idea of what could come out of it. And then on top of it, spend as much time as you can traveling at that time of your life, either between high school and college, or in the middle of college, or right after college. Because I'm sure, Jack, you can attest to this. After you come back from that time period, there will be fewer opportunities where you can just go do whatever the hell you want to do in your life without any baggage or responsibilities.
You're in this great time in your life where your 20s are the time you want to invest in yourself. The more work you put into your 20s, the more dividends, the more investment returns you're going to see in your 30s, 40s, and going forward.
Right.
And so the 20s are that time, learn a language, see the world, understand how things work, break down your preconceived notions of what life is about, or what everything is about, and even if what politics is about. I looked at it, and I constantly say this to people, is you cannot understand what the United States of America is until you've spent a significant time outside of it. And I don't mean just like, I went, snowboarding in Argentina for like a weekend.
Right.
I've been seeing the world. No. I mean, like, really being in another country, experiencing a completely foreign culture, and understanding that there are well, look at it this way: the majority of people in this world do not live in the United States. And they have vastly different opinions about how humans should interact, how government should work,
how lions would form,
how lions would form. Yeah, one thing in Shanghai, I'm telling you, I had to learn that really fast. Is that the subway rolls up and it's just a brawl. It's
Right.
just a straight brawl, and you can either sit there and take it, or you can start dropping bows.
You got to get in there. I mean, I myself, I did study abroad. I studied in London, but then I used London as a way to just travel all over Europe. And eventually I made it to six out of 7 continents. Australia is the only one that I haven't been to yet. I was fluent in Spanish at one time. My kids still think I am every time we talk to somebody in public. Well, we were actually just in Cuba, so I had a chance to flex my Spanish skills in front of them there. And I think I've been to something like 40 countries. And by doing that, I mean, it gave me such a valuable perspective on the world that when I see guys our age begin to travel, and they're like, oh yeah, man, I went to wherever in Europe and now I'm beginning to understand the world. I'm like, yeah, you really, if you had the chance, it's best to do it as young as possible. And for you, Jack, obviously that paid off bigly, as it were, because not only did you take your experience in China, turn it into like a job there, then you acquired skills in China, brought them home, and turned that into another career. So what happened when you came back?
Right. So essentially I got back and I decided, it almost made me more patriotic in a sense that I understood America better. I wanted to do something for my country. I wanted to get involved in a way that would put me, more hands-on some of these international issues, the rise of China, right? And joining the military, I felt was an interesting way to do that. The Navy was the one that had the most sort of international footprint. You don't really, we have Air Force, Army, and Marines throughout, obviously, the world, obviously a little bit more than I think we should probably. And, but the Navy is really the one that conducts a lot of diplomacy for the United States. And that's what attracted me to naval service. And from the start, when I explained to them my skill set, they said, okay, you're going to be over here.
So how did that work? I mean, did you just go down to the local strip mall in suburban Philadelphia to the recruiter's office and walk in?
I literally did. I literally did. And this is to your point, and when I said earlier that I did everything backwards, my life story is backwards, is I was the first person in my family, at least of this generation, to serve in the military. My grandfather, who had passed on, was World War II. No idea what I was doing. I didn't even know the difference between enlisted and officer at the time, right? And so because of that, I thought you just walk into the Navy office, you join the Navy, right? And this is something that I really try to stress when I speak out to people, especially because a lot of people come up to me and they say, they're thinking about joining the military. What should they do? And I tell people there is a 4-letter acronym you need to learn, and it is called ROTC. ROTC is the best way. That's your cheat code into the military. You do that concurrently while attending college, so you finish college with your degree and a commission in the military. So you're conducting your basic training during your college summers. And depending on the program that you go into, you might even start at an advanced level. So you might be 22, but you're coming in as an 02 as opposed to an 01 if you're just coming off the street. And that's 2 years of rank right there, rank and pay.
Got it. I tried to enlist in the Air Force when I was like 18 or 19. I was deciding between, I was like 20. This is how I ended up studying abroad. I wanted to get out of town.
That's how they get you.
And I was looking between a fishing boat in Alaska, joining the Air Force, or going and studying abroad. And when I went to join the Air Force, they told me I was too fat, Jack.
You see, because I know you now, and you're like the one word I would never use to describe you is fat.
They said I was too fat, and that I had to go lose weight before I could even sign up. I was like, but dude, I got a 99 on my ASVAB across the board.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, you're still too fat. Come back later.
Wow.
So I was like, forget this. I'm going to London. But anyway,
So I ended up enlisting I did an enlistment for several years, and then I went on the officer side, even though I had finished my degree prior to that, which is,
Right.
as anyone will tell you, is the absolute backwards way of doing anything. But
Was that hard? Was that hard to be enlisted with your degree, knowing you're gonna, ultimately end up as an officer? Or what was that experience like?
At the same, even though I do say that, I really, really respect the work that the enlisted folks do, and that the fact that I got to do that as well, and understanding. I've seen both sides of the coin now, and understanding that at the officer level, you're a manager, right? You're managing the people that are doing the work. So if you want to be a technical expert, if you want to have your hands on in sort of doing the job, that's all on the enlisted side. The officer level, it just doesn't come up as much. So being in intelligence, that's what got me to Guantanamo Bay in 2012, and being able to work in the detainee interrogation operations and really be involved in all that. That had I been an officer at that time, okay, I would have been down there, but it would have been in a managerial capacity.
Right. So, all right, so let's go from enlisted to Guantanamo. How does that happen? And then describe for me also like what it was like when you first showed up down there. But take us to the point how you end up, because that's not China. Cuba's not China. Afghanistan people, or Afghanis, Saudis, whatever, whomever's in Guantanamo, they're not Chinese.
No, they're not.
How do you?
The Uyghurs are, though.
How do you get from Philadelphia enlisted to Guantanamo Bay?
Yeah. So great example of how when you join the military or the government, or any real major corporation organization, you're just kind of a number. So here I am, a guy who's got 3.3 Mandarin ability, spent years abroad in China, and they say, hey, we need somebody to go to Guantanamo. And there you go.
There you go. And you're off.
It's pretty much just like that. So there was an Army unit that was deploying down, and they needed +1 IS. I was an IS-2 at the time. It's an E5 for anyone out there who understands military ranks. And the Navy came up. They went to the Navy. The Navy needed somebody. The bean counters sifted through all the people. So when you're in a deployment capacity, they look for, you have to be what's called mobilization ready. And so mobilization ready means you have the requisite training, or you can get the requisite training, which I actually did need to do training en route in Arizona. You've got, all your shots, your medical's good. You don't need any major surgeries coming up or anything. Your physical fitness is good. That you sort of meet all the boxes, check them all off that are needed for you to be able to mobilize to conduct that deployment. And so I had everything except for what was called a Joint Interrogator Analyst course. And they said, well, we'll send you to the course, and then you'll go to Guantanamo. So that's how it started. And so fall of 2012, I'm there on an Army base on the border, Sierra Vista, Arizona, conducting essentially a 2-month course. Straight from there, I fly to Norfolk Naval Base, hop on a sort of a charter flight, and then from Norfolk went to Jacksonville, from Jacksonville, Cuba.
Tell me about the training that you did.
So the training...
What do they train you in to send you to Guantanamo Bay, where if you're a general public like I am, and your perception of Guantanamo Bay, to me it sounds like a medieval dungeon, right? With the worst criminals in the whole world chained up to the wall, beards down to their knees, piles of like skeletons in chains, for the other dead guys that died in the cell. Like, to me, it's the scariest, craziest place on the planet, basically.
So
what do they train you first in before they sent you down there? And then tell me what it was like literally arriving.
Yeah. So it's interesting about your view of it. It's like you're not completely wrong, but that's like a funhouse mirror kind of version of what it's really like.
Right.
I mean, they do have the beards, right? But that's for religious purposes. That's not because of not allowed to shave. They want the beards that long.
Right.
Actually they measure them by fists. How many fists is your beard?
Gotcha.
You've got like a beard and a half.
Yeah.
A fist and a half.
I got a summer beard right now.
Yeah, it's like a fist and a half beard. Yeah. So you'd be okay. Like, they'd be cool with you.
I'd fit in.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for other reasons you wouldn't, but but for the beard, yes. And
The list is long.
It is. It is. And, we're talking a devout Muslim community of Al-Qaeda members.
Right.
So the training they give you is essentially this idea of how to debrief someone through what's called rapport building tactics. And what do I mean by that? So there's this Hollywood narrative of interrogation, which, you can really thank, I guess, Gina Haspel and George W. Bush and Donald Rumsfeld for skewing, and is that everyone thinks of the CIA's version of interrogation as what we do, right? But I was military intelligence. So their stuff was enhanced interrogation, waterboarding, stress positions, really extreme kind of tactics. Us guys in the military in uniform, we don't do any of that stuff. Our version of interrogation is form a relationship with this person, build a connection with them one-on-one, and then through the course of that connection, through the course of that relationship, over time, hold conversations with them, a series of conversations with them that you can use. This is all unclassified, by the way. You can go look this up.
It's also in How to Win Friends and Influence People, basically.
Oh, is it? Good.
Well,
Yeah,
I mean,
very
it's
good.
like the general, same general.
Yeah, it's the
gist.
same idea. And then through the course of that, manipulate the conversation in certain ways where you can get the information that you want. So, classic example that we would use is, if you're trying to get a number from a girl at a bar, right? Or I guess these days you might even say her Instagram page, right?
Right.
Because it's kind of the same thing. And this is the example I always use. So if you're trying to get a number from a girl at a bar, you're not just going to walk up to her and start screaming, "Give me your number. Tell me what the digits are." It's not going to work very well.
No.
Right. And if it's the kind of girl who does respond well to that, you probably don't want to call that number.
Right, exactly.
Exactly. That's
or to keep the analogy going, it could be fake.
Right, exactly. It could be fake, could be many other things, right? So you want to go up to them and maybe you tell an anecdote, maybe you make some quippy reference to something that's going on in the room, or you start people watching with, you do anything you can to sort of sideways get closer to them, talk it up to them. Some people use pickup lines, but I don't recommend that.
This is what's called an indirect opener.
Yeah, it's a indirect opener.
Yeah.
Exactly. And and at Guantanamo Bay, for example, obviously, they know who they are and they know who you are when you're walking in. So it's not, you don't. It's not as indirect as it would be in the dating world.
Right. It's not as subtle.
Right. But so throughout the course of the training, it's role playing. So it's a lot of role playing of, it's role playing. It's all recorded by your teachers. And if you screw up, it will be played on the, on the video for everybody else to see. Like, why did you screw up? So my very first one that I did in training, actually, I haven't told this story before, at least outside of the military. I haven't told it publicly, but I can. So
Jack Murphy exclusive.
I had this teacher, instructor. He'd been DIA and CIA and a whole bunch of stuff, and he eventually retired and thought that'd be a fun job for him to do as a contractor. And so I get in there and I say, you might get the reference, you might not, and I said, "Hello. First, we'd just like to get to know you. Want to ask you a bunch of questions, and we'll have them answered immediately. Who is your daddy, and what does he do?"
Is that your best Arnold, I think?
It's pretty terrible, Arnold. But I'm sitting there, and the instructor just looks at me, and because I knew the instructor had been making Arnold Schwarzenegger jokes in the class earlier, and I knew that he was a fan, so I make the instructor crack up laughing.
Right.
And then he cuts the thing off, and he's like, "Posobiec, you better knock that crap right off, or I'm going to fail you."
Right.
You got to be serious about that. Say, "Hey, you said I should try to make you laugh, so..."
Right, exactly.
And I did. And so he said, "Hey, you got a point there."
Okay.
He's like, "But you got to take it seriously too."
So do you think that this training has helped you in your life? And I'm gonna say this to you as a compliment. You demonstrate that type of skill in your interpersonal connections and contacts. I've seen it with other people. I've seen it with myself. everyone that I know that knows you walks away with the sense, oh, that Jack, he's just, what a great guy. What a lovely family. What a nice, pleasant interaction I just had with them. And I'm not saying it's contrived by any means. I'm just saying it's like internalized, right? I think that you're excellent at rapport building, and it probably pays great benefits and dividends in what you're doing today. Do you think that those skills were something that you picked up there that you carried with you? Was it something that you were born with? Are you just naturally charismatic, Jack?
I think there's a little of both. I mean, I think my father worked at he's actually a psychiatric nurse, so he understood a lot of that basic psychology stuff. It came very natural for him, so I kind of saw what he was able to do. And he's also the same way. He's very good at getting people to open up. He's very good at disarming people. He's just really charismatic guy. Not always to me, but because I'm his punk kid.
Jack Posobiec the punk.
But it's something that I saw from my father, and then I kind of learned how to do it as well. And I don't know. I sort of found that it's a great way to make relationships with people. It's a great way to just be polite, to be nice to other people, to act. Active listening is something that is so lost in our digital social media age. What active listening is so many times, I don't know, let's say you're in a Facebook comment war with someone or a tweet battle, and all you're waiting for is, what am I going to say next? What am I going to say next? Well, active listening is a skill that teaches you to actually listen to what the other person is saying with an open mind, and you can even repeat it back to them at times, and you're letting them know that you've heard and internalized what they're saying, and then you can pick up things that you maybe have completely missed if all you're thinking about is, how am I going to respond? What am I going to say next? What should I do? Through active listening techniques, you can actually learn to be a better you. You can learn to interview well for jobs. You can learn to just have better interactions with your peers, with your superiors, if you're working at a job at a company or something like that. I mean, these are skills that everyone can use to have better success in their lives.
Definitely. A politician comes to mind that seemed to be very good at that was Bill Clinton. And I remember his...
I'm gonna wake up every day thinking of you.
Right. And his famous lines were always like, I feel your pain.
I feel your pain.
I feel it.
Might slip a little bit.
Right.
Right? Because it looks a little painful. It's like, oh, it's so painful. I have to bite my lip.
It's just totally random. How crazy is it seeing those? Did you see that clip from him with Paul Tsongas that was floating around the other day? Anyway, just seeing Bill Clinton, campaign Bill Clinton, dude, he's younger. He's younger then than I am now. Good grief. He was just a baby back then.
Yeah, that guy, in terms of politics, right? I'm just saying the politics of it. It was an incredible skill set in terms of being able to work a room, being able to talk to people, being able to connect with people on an emotional level. I don't see anyone in the current Democrat field that has that.
Oh, God. In fact, they're all just horribly abrasive, and they're not active listening to anybody. So one of the other things about active listening that I wanted to mention is that it in it of itself is persuasive. Like, you don't even have to, if you actively listen and you can like send your energy back across to the other person and show them that you have actually heard what they said, you can be more persuasive with your own positions by allowing that sort of personal energy exchange and that connection.
Another one is mimicking gestures, physical mimicry, mimicking.
Jack and I are completely mimicking
each other right now. And mimicking tone, mimicking syntax, pacing. Right. So this is all kind of codified in what's called pacing and leading.
Yeah.
Right. So when you match someone's tone, when you match their mannerisms, they instantly feel much more at ease with you. And so a lot of the times when I'm doing interviews for One American News, I'll conduct a pre-interview with that person before it goes to air, where I can, and I've gotten it down where I can do this pretty quickly now, even if it's someone that I haven't met before, within a few minutes I can kind of get a sense of what their style is, and then I try to, in my own Jack Posobiec way, match it or bring my energy to their level. And so when they go into the actual studio, of course, there's lights on, there's cameras, there's microphones. But when they see someone who puts them at ease, it puts them in a place where they're able to open it up more. And I think you get a much better interview that way.
Yeah, no question about it. So it's fascinating to me that these communication skills are just so prevalent and useful everywhere and necessary everywhere. And it's like one of those things like sales and accounting. Everybody should learn a little bit,
yeah.
a little bit of
Oh,
both of
yeah.
those, no matter what your job is going to be, because basically everything is sales. Everything has some accounting in it, and everything really does boil down to communication, especially today in our world of competing narratives and storylines and the power of the message and of ideas. And so, continue on with your story, though, would you please? Because I
So
want to get.
I will say this for the one bit that's a little different is in the interrogation mode. So all of those are positive communication skills, right?
Yeah.
But they also give us the option, or give the interrogators the option of sort of committing negative communication with people. And so depending on the type of person that you're dealing with, these are called approved approaches. One of the approaches they'll also do the flip side, right? So like, the expression buttering somebody up is something that we all know. Well, you could do something like buttering someone down, right? Which is kind of like negging in the PUA community. Yeah, I know, right? Well, that'll be after the show. That, you sort of say, you almost sort of put someone down a little bit,
right,
to get them into a defensive posture. Because sometimes when people are put into defensive postures, say you have somebody very prideful, and then you attack their pride, you attack their achievements, you question them, right? You ask them critical questions, skeptic. Because of that pride, they're going to respond in a defensive posture, and to defend their pride, right? Defend their reputation. And in doing so, who knows what information would spill out along with that.
Right. And when you go into an interrogation, and I still want you to give me a description of what it's like to walk up to Guantanamo Bay the first time, but when you walk into an interrogation, do they give you, okay, today we're buttering up, today we're buttering down?
Yes.
What's the approach?
The idea is you would, and I can't get into the specifics of the operational details, but it's agreed upon beforehand. It's sort of like there's like a team manager, and you sort of say, and there'd be a series of these that had gone on, and you actually have a psychologist on staff that you work with, who's constantly watching, who's constantly observing your behavior, their behavior, so that you're getting profiled while the detainee's being profiled too.
Of course.
And then so they try to match up people's personalities, ages, genders, races with different people to see what works and what doesn't, because a lot of it's just the messenger too. Right. So depending on the age, you might get someone who's very young with someone who's very old, so now you've got like a student-teacher kind of relationship, right? Or you might have the reverse. You might have someone who's old and very young, and so the student-teacher angle it's almost like a mentor, or like an elder sort of thing.
Right.
And so it's basically agreed upon beforehand. You have to have a plan. You have to have a plan, and legally you actually need that as well. That it needs to be written down, and obviously because of the CIA's enhanced interrogation plan, a lot of laws were passed congressionally to control what gets done on our end, even though nobody in military intelligence was involved in that. So legally speaking, it has to be down on paper what's going to happen prior to. Then it's all recorded during. We can't even touch that recording. We can't even watch it afterwards. It's all preserved. So that's out there. I think it gets sent out to somewhere in the NSA, and then after which, you do like a full-on debrief with your, what went well, what went wrong, what screwed up, what could you have done better, were there any leads that you picked up, was there any information that you picked up, that kind of thing. So that is an interrogation session, right, without any of the details of it. As far as arriving for the first time, so you get to the island,
because I was just there, man. I was just in Cuba. I didn't get to Guantanamo.
You were on the other end of it, though.
Absolutely.
So that's the thing. So we're on the base, and there's a big bay, obviously Guantanamo Bay, and we can't go off the base. There's no, even after Obama and Kerry kind of reopened the embassy, there's no status of forces agreement. So U.S. armed forces still can't go off. So we used to have this joke, we say, Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, close but no cigar. There you go. Good T-shirts. We really did. And
it's out on the east side of the island, I guess, then?
Southeast.
Southeast.
Yeah, southeast. So towards like Dominican and Puerto Rico over there, and even Jamaica's not too far. You arrive on the west side of the bay. You land there. You then take a ferry over to the east side of the bay, and that ferry ride is about 25-30 minutes as you're crossing over. And it's like any other military base when you first arrive. There's a shopette. There's little housing. My house was essentially a shed. It was kind of like an aluminum shed. When I say house, it's not a house. It's
quarters.
It's barracks. Yeah, quarters. So I had a bedroom, which is maybe 10 foot by 10 foot, which was linked. It's essentially like a Connex box almost, shared with another guy. And then in the middle, there's like a shared toilet, essentially. There's toilet and shower that we would use. So like you would walk through that, and then you could walk into the next room over. So
it was a 2-bedroom, 1 bath.
2-bedroom, 1 bath.
On the water.
On the desert, more so. It's really arid too, by the way.
Yeah.
So that part of Cuba, it's actually considered almost a desert because of essentially there's a lot of mountains on the other side of the bay that block a lot of the precipitation coming through. And so we get cactus, we've got rock iguanas that'll grow up to 3-4 feet running around all the time. Banana rats, which are these huge rats that like probably the size of like small dogs that just run around in the night. Yeah. And which is really fun because
gross.
Our movie theater was outside on a sort of repurposed baseball field, and the banana rats would know. Was it just like a projector basically and a big screen? But we would get first run stuff, which is cool. So the banana rats would know that that's where all the people were eating. So whenever the
banana rat.
Yeah, well, you call them banana rats not because they look like bananas and they don't eat bananas, but because their feces looks like, the banana. You remember runts, like the candy runts?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, remember the banana ones?
Yeah.
That's exactly what their feces looks like.
Wow,
Like
this conversation took a real turn.
Just little piles of those little runts bananas, but
feces was not on the pre-approved word list before we did this interview.
So you knew at some point during the movie the banana rat tribes and the families would like just swarm in to get all the popcorn and everything up, and so you just be waiting for it. But it was really cool because of the projector and the way the light would play out, you would actually see the shadows of the banana rats as they ran across the different aisles in the theater, like projected up on the screen.
Well, it definitely fits in with my experiences in Cuba.
So that's life, right, on the base. But everybody wants to ask about the detention facility. So
yeah, man, tell me that it looks like the prison where Cersei kept that woman from the islands. What was her name? And remember, she chained her up across from her daughter, and she's like, I'm going to let you sit here and watch your daughter die and decay, and I'm going to feed you, so you have to stay alive and watch that happen. Oh, you didn't watch the show, did you?
No, it's more like, do you ever watch any of those Scared Straight shows?
Yes.
It's more like that.
My dad made me watch that.
Your dad was in one of those?
No, he made me watch it.
Watch it.
He made me watch it.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it scared me out of going to prison.
Yeah, you don't want to go there. So no, that's more of what it's like.
Okay.
It's all indoors. It looks like a modern prison. It's based off of Supermax, so Florence ADX in Colorado.
Okay.
It's the same design as the Florence ADX. So if you've seen any of those, that's what it looks like.
I'm so disappointed.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. So what's amazing though is you know that picture that everyone's always seen of the detainees in orange and their heads are down and they're outside and there's like chain link fence and everything, right?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
You know that picture, right?
Yes,
I know,
of course.
and I knew you knew that picture without even me asking you prior to that.
Because that's the picture that we all see.
The Guantanamo picture, right?
Right.
Do you know how long they were actually held like that?
Enough time to take like 20 shots?
About an hour.
Yeah.
That was the first batch of detainees that ever arrived to Guantanamo, and they were waiting in processing, and so they were held like that.
I got it.
For about an hour before they were moved into the facility.
Right. Well, that's a great example of the way that single moments in time, snapshots, get transmitted around the world, used over and over again to tell stories and change the narratives, manipulate people, start wars, get people elected, etc. You know a little something about that.
I know a little something about that.
So we're gonna definitely circle back. Circle back.
You
to
know,
that
walking up, it's all blocked off. You have to go through numerous security checks before you get in.
I mean, if there's not a moat, I don't really care.
So There kind of is, and that mode is called the Caribbean Sea.
Oh, true.
So the facility itself is right on the ocean. So I mean, there's a detention facility, and you can see it on Google Maps. And there's a detention facility, and then maybe 100 yards, less than 100 yards, maybe 50 yards, and then there's a sheer rock face, and then just waves.
Dang.
And then just open ocean after that. So if you're in the top level of the facility looking out one of the windows, you can actually see the ocean.
Oh.
You can as you can imagine, they use that as sort of like a reward for good behavior.
Aha.
Yeah, it's room with a view.
Tell Daddy what he wants to know, and I'll let you have the good room.
Not necessarily that. More like just good behavior in general, right?
Got it.
Right. So, not reward for providing information, but reward for, did you follow all the rules? How many demerits do you have?
Did you put your dish in the dishwasher?
Did you put your dish in the dishwasher? Did you get in any fights with any of the other detainees? Because a lot of it's communal living.
Right.
There's two facilities. One's communal living, and then one is more a single cell. And then that is also separated by this idea of good behavior.
Right.
And so it looks like any other modern prison that you've seen, with one notable exception. One extremely notable exception is the fact that everyone in there is the same religion, and everyone is in a general scope, from the same part of the world.
Right.
I mean, obviously there's difference between Arabs and Afghans and Pashtuns and everything. The complete difference between all that, obviously, with regional differences, but everyone's in general from Middle East, Levant.
Right. Compared to people's perceptions of prisons in America, where you've got like all the black folks on one side, all the whites on another, and the Latinos on another. And it's, that kind of stark differences that we can easily relate to.
And then also the issues that arise, you've seen countless documentaries about sort of the rise of the in-prison gangs that sort of form, and the rivalries that happen. That does happen inside Guantanamo, but it's not as stark because of the cultural similarity. So it's not. So I mean, like the Saudis hate the Afghans because they consider them to be like hicks, But then the Iraqis don't like the Saudis because the Iraqis will say like, oh, you guys are just a bunch of Bedouin who, happen to have oil, and so you're rich, but you're still living in the third century, whereas we had Babylon,
Right.
We had the kingdom of Ur, and so there's a lot of that sort of nationalistic rivalry that still goes on. Then the bigger switch in terms of all that would be sort of the more hardliners versus the moderates in terms of radical Islam. So in terms of, do they, there are people in there that are still fighting the fight, that are still waging the war, right? So even though they've been there, 10, 15 years, they're still waging war on the United States from their perspective of radical Islam. But there are also other ones who have decided that, perhaps radical Islam wasn't the best choice to make with their lives, and they've really moderated to the point of saying, look, I still believe in Islam, I'm still a Muslim, but I don't believe in, killing every American that I see.
Right. Well, neither you nor I elected to put those people there, nor can we elect to get them out of there. So we'll leave the judgment on that sort of aside.
Precisely. And that's kind of actually one thing that would come up is sometimes, they would say, why are we put in here? And I said, look, I was ordered here too.
Right.
What
was your biggest takeaway, you think, from your experience there?
Wow, my biggest takeaway is that,
because Jack, not everybody who's listening to this podcast was an interrogator at Guantanamo Bay.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't specifically say I was interrogator.
Interrogator.
But interrogator operations.
There you go.
Because obviously I'm not allowed to say certain things.
And I want to be precise too. So,
just that, and this is going to sound weird, but I'll put it this way: that there are people who may be vastly different from us, who may have even joined organizations called Al-Qaeda, but you can still find commonalities with them. And that they joined these organizations not because they're crazy, you know, in this, which I think is this knee jerk response to say, well, you're crazy to do something like that. And it is crazy, obviously, if I, you know, planes into buildings, but to understand that they have a logical, rational, in their, you know, their own sense, they have a self-rationalization that brings them to do these things. And only really by understanding what that is, and it's, you know, it's an ideology, by understanding what they believe through what they say is the only way you can actually understand what the situation is. So for people who just kind of paint with a broad brush and say everyone in that part of the world is bad, that's not right. Or to say that, you know, everyone in that part of the world is just crazy and backwards and everything, that's not right either. But to understand that there's more going on under the surface than just adherence to, you know, whatever Osama bin Laden says, and try to understand the ideology that's driving and motivating this. I found that very, very interesting. And so I think it's one thing where I say to people, look, when in my public career now, when I'm talking about radical Islam, I have a perspective on it that's very hands-on, right? More so than probably a, you know, a college professor or someone who's never spent time listening to the things that these people say.
Right. That's fascinating. And it made me actually just think, we're going to talk about this in a little bit, William Lynn's book, Fourth Generation Warfare, and then thinking about how, like, you said radical, I almost said feminism, radical Islam. In my mind, I was thinking radicalized Islam, and I was thinking about Fourth Generation Warfare, William Lynn, and the stories, sort of fables, I guess, that he told in there about how American behavior can actually create these exact people that are living now in Guantanamo Bay.
His book is fantastic. I highly recommend it to everyone. And in fact, I modeled my book 4D Warfare off of his book 4th Generation Warfare. But the cultural understanding that he puts forward in that book is it's not comprehensive, but it's a great starter for anybody who wants to get into that space.
Right. I highly recommend it for everybody. 4th Generation Warfare, William Lind on Castilla House, I think, because it's just a great way to understand. It's sort of a foundational piece in trying to understand the world today, and how the future of warfare is going to look, and how we're perhaps already in the middle of a more advanced sort of 4G sort of civil conflict here.
I wish I could
United States.
I wish I could give that book to every leader in the United States,
right?
Every political and military leader, and say, please just and don't just repeat what this says. Understand what this book means, and understand how there are things that you may think are good ideas, and there may be policy or foreign policy outcomes that you're looking to achieve, but you're going about it in a way that's actually detrimental to your interests and to the interests of others because of what essentially 4th Generation Warfare talks about.
I was going to say, why don't we just sum it up real quick?
Yeah. The way you go about things is almost more important than your intention.
Very well said. Very succinct. So in the book, Lind goes through an example of Operation David and Operation Goliath and what the different outcomes would be. And Operation Goliath is like bringing the most amount of weaponry to bear, you know, in a certain point, and like flattening cities and rolling through with tanks and the whole thing.
And the soldiers are, you know, marching with, you know, big helmets and armor and just showing everybody how tough they are, and real like World War II style, just marching across the country, you know, and conquering as you go.
Right, even like World War I, even.
Right.
And then the Operation David is about you know, how to integrate yourself sort of into the culture and society that you're occupying, and like how to achieve your goals without dropping, you know, Moabs on villages just because you didn't like what happened there. Like one of the examples that I really liked was instead of having like a huge base outside the city, like have your guys like actually quartered within the city. And then B was like, instead of dropping, you know, bombs to kill a guy, you know, hire like the local gangster guys to do a hit job or something like
exactly
that. Like very small sort of. It's a whole perspective change in terms of lining up on either side of the field and shooting at each other or destroying everything in your path, or like realizing that you need the people there to support you, and you need also to have something left to govern at the end when you're done. And the whole reason I brought this up just now is because operating as Goliath, you do definitely radicalize people and create more enemies. Whereas if you go about it in a much more empathetic and sort of socially aware way, even it's more surgical, and you then you create less enemies and less conflict.
And one of the things that I actually talk about more in 4D Warfare, which is my book, I take the David versus Goliath paradigm, and that's the way he puts it is so eloquent. He said, "Whoever read the story of David versus Goliath and identified with Goliath, right? You always identify with David, no matter who you are,
or hope for Goliath to win,
right? Or hope for right. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah,
it's literally the opposite.
And
story.
Would you say that the United States is perceived as David or Goliath around the world, Jack Posobiec?
And this is key. This is so key to everybody listening to this in the United States that doesn't already understand this. That the rest of the world, for right or wrong, right, they perceive us as Goliath. Pretty much every country on the planet, even our allies, view us as Goliath. And they're not necessarily wrong if you look in terms of the way that we make demands of other countries, the way that we influence other countries,
invade countries, kill everybody, and disrupt entire regions.
Right. and the way that we call it intervention for democratic purposes and nation building, but to the rest of the world, we just sort of look like we've invaded because we felt like it and we want something, and we're just shooting up people, and that's created a perception of the United States where, under George W. Bush, we had that perception, and then people thought Obama would change things, and then he just sort of continued doing it. The invasion of Libya, which really doesn't get talked about very much, this changes perceptions around the world and of the United States. And, as we sit now, not to get into current events, but people are talking about Iran, doing something there. And so understanding that, and this is a big problem, not a problem, but a big situation or a big circumstance that has changed since warfare has gone on from World War II to now is the rise of first the mainstream media and then second of social media. So the understanding that something that's done in a small capacity, right? You mentioned Abu Ghraib earlier. I mentioned the photo of Guantanamo. Even if it's something that only happens for 1 second, if that moment in time is captured and it makes someone look like David and makes someone look like Goliath, that can be amplified around the world faster than any response can be met, or any and no explanation is ever going to be more powerful than that image. No explanation is ever going to be more powerful than that first narrative that comes out.
Right. Do you think that social media and 2019 media in general will make it harder to bang war drums and rally people behind the cause of war?
It will change it, because there are ways that you can manipulate social media, that governments could manipulate social media, that could, think of a Franz Ferdinand situation, right? So Franz Ferdinand was the Archduke. He was assassinated
when
in the lead up to World War I, and so that kicked off this series of secret alliances that led to World War I happening. So you got one instant that sparks an entire world war, and it wasn't really the whole world, but with social media, you could still have that same effect. You could easily have that same effect with a 30-second video, depending on what the video was and who it was and what was happening. I think absolutely something like that could happen.
You don't think that now that there's a million competing narratives and people like yourself and some of our friends that have very large platforms that can drive narrative, that contrasted to, say, World War II or even the Iraq War, the first Iraq War, when the New York Times and the Washington Post basically had a virtual monopoly on the information flow, they were able, and I don't know if it was a conspiracy, but it probably was, they were able to work with the fake intelligence information and tell us all that there was weapons of mass destruction, and everybody, who had half a brain was like, Al-Qaeda, nuclear bombs, weapons of mass destruction, Saddam Hussein, holy shit, of course we need to go to war. Like, it made perfect sense, but that was, I can't, what was that, 2002 or 3 or something? That was the second.
2 into 3.
That was the second one, yeah. So it was like, today there would be a million competing narratives.
So,
there'd be a million independent journalists. There'd be a million people spreading different stories. So it takes a lot, I think, to rally a country into sending off, 500,000 people to invade a country.
What's interesting about it is now with social media, you have the democratization of information, and the ability for one controlling narrative to be out there is lost. So there are, you're right in that sense. There are competing narratives now, and there are things that we can see. I mean, look, there's always going to be competing narratives, but now because you've got so many competing narratives, if there is a situation where they say, this country is spiraling out of control, right? Country X, let's just, take that up. So, but then somebody in country X pops up on Instagram and says, hey, here's a birthday party I'm going to right now, and it's a fun party, and everyone's having a good time, and we're just enjoying life, and
we're human beings just like you guys.
And you show that to people in country, A, well, then country A, it's very hard to demonize someone in country X if you can just see them hanging out and having a birthday party. And this is something that, I learned
to dehumanize.
Dehumanize, right? Yeah. And so this is something that I experienced from having traveled around the world and spent time in other cultures, is like people are people wherever you go.
Indeed.
And they're all going to be people. They're going to think differently. They're going to talk differently. They might look differently, but they're going to be people. They're going to go to work. They're going to care about their kids. They're going to worry about what they're eating tonight. They're going to have the same type of interpersonal problems that you see around the planet. And everybody's kind of just trying to get through the day at the end of the day.
Would you say that the MAGA wing of American politics is the anti-war wing of American politics?
I'd say there is a linkage between the anti-war groups and MAGA groups. MAGA is definitely the most anti-war coalition that the right has ever had.
Yeah.
In American politics, and sort of anti-intervention, and you saw this again and again over the course of the early Trump administration, that there would be times where neoconservatives would be pushing for war. The media would be really beating those drums. Someone's attacking children. We have to do something. We have to get involved. And you would see a lot of people in the MAGA community saying, is war the only way we can respond to this? Do we really know what's going on? Should we immediately jump the gun to launching missiles or invading when there's a nebulous situation and we're not sure what's happening? I'm not referring to anything specific, but you've seen this sort of narrative play out again and again, where a lot of folks in the MAGA community turn things around and they say, and this is I think quintessentially the reason that Donald Trump was able to stand out so much in the election and really win over, even in the general election, right? Not so much the primary, which people talk about, the general. Why did he win the general? Is because he said, I want to care about the American people and their interests first. And that was something that nobody had said in politics for 20, 30 years, of saying, hey, what about our inner cities? What about our infrastructure? What about the wages of American workers? What about these jobs that have been shipped overseas? And a lot of these things, we didn't used to think of them as political issues, right? We used to think of political issues as, should we own guns? How many guns should we own? How should we get guns? What's going on with abortion? Should we have that? And, these are the traditional areas of sort of left versus right debate. But when Trump came out, he started talking about America versus the rest of the world type of things. And that was an entirely different framework than anyone had ever entered into before. And I think that because of that, there were people who it fit very much in line with a lot of the anti-war crowd, who also would make that same argument to say this war, this intervention, this nation building situation doesn't serve the needs of America.
Right. It's not necessarily just like a strident anti-war position. It's more like, all these recent wars have been really stupid and dumb, and lots of people have died, and what good has it done for America? Why aren't we just a little bit more careful with our decision making and analysis moving forward, right?
One of my best friends in the whole world just yesterday got back from Afghanistan. His second deployment there. He spent another year there, and remember I asked him, just we got to talk on the phone, and I said, what would you say the goal was over there? What were you doing, right? I mean, obviously, not to talk operationally, but he said, we're just kind of delaying the inevitable. I mean,
the inevitable pullout.
Right, the inevitable pullout and the eventual takeover by the local populace. Right. Take back over their country. And the idea that America is going to be able to fundamentally change a country that has existed in the same state for thousands of years, it's foolish.
Right.
Alexander the Great could not, quote unquote, fix Afghanistan.
Right.
Right. And then he eventually moved on.
It's so funny that you just said delay the inevitable, which is return the country to its people. And like just saying that out loud really struck me, because I feel like there's a lot of people that would hear that sentence and think it's a failure. Like it's a failure, that the inevitable is that we're going to pull out and return power to the people of whose country it is.
Right. So you think of all the preconceptions that have to come before that statement.
Yeah.
That we should have the say over who controls another country versus, look, folks, I joined the military. I was an intelligence officer. I'm all for, quote unquote, getting the bad guys. If there's bad guys that need gotten, let's go do it. Right. We've got Navy SEALs for that. We've got a fantastic military for that. If there's another military in the world that's threatening us, that, I feel bad for them. Right. But when you take that a step too far and you start just going around looking for fights, and you're looking at people that don't really pose a threat to us and saying, oh, we have to fight these people just because, that's when you get into issues.
Right. Yeah. I don't know enough about Iran to have a real legitimate opinion on it, other than I just can't see anything good coming of like dropping off 500,000 troops into the Mideast again. So to the extent that we don't go to war with Iran, I think I'm going to be pretty happy about that. But let's get back onto our narrative track here. Let's move on with Guantanamo. You're back to the United States. It's like what year is it where you're back in America, and when do you start getting started with Twitter? When do you start getting involved in social media, and sort of take us through that transition?
So I'd already been involved with social media. And we are going to talk about this. We're totally going to talk about this. Because a lot of people say, where did this guy Posobiec come from? There's an article, kind of another, attack article. This one from the far right coming to attack me. The anti-Semite crowd doesn't like me very much. And they were saying, who's this guy Posobiec? Where did he come from? Well, I started my Twitter account in April of 2012. And it had nothing to do with politics. Still in the military, still kind of behind that curtain of the intelligence community, so I didn't want to be out in public too much. So I just started a Twitter account to clown on Game of Thrones. And when that show took off, I'd read the books when I was younger, so I started a Twitter account and a blog called Angry GOT Fan, the Angry Game of Thrones Fan. And it was a joke account. It was satirical, and it was just sort of making fun of the TV show from the perspective of like a really obsessed book fan, all capital letters, screaming at everybody all the time. And it really took off. It actually really took off. And so it became this sort of hobby of mine. And I got to go to, some cool events, got to meet George R. R. Martin, have breakfast with him, the creator of the series.
No kidding. All through effective use of social media.
All through social media. And nobody even asked, what's your Clark Kent job? What's your real job? How are you making money while you're, are you just doing this for fun? And, there'd be times where, as an example, they sent me down to Fort Huachuca for another round of training a couple of years later in the human intelligence realm. And George R. R. Martin lives in Santa Fe, and he was doing an event in Albuquerque one weekend while I was in Arizona. So I kind of looked at the driving distance, and I kind of said to them, hey, if I leave on Friday, I can make it to to Albuquerque by Saturday morning. And that's what I did. I just drove up through the desert. Nice. And there I was in Albuquerque, and I realized why they filmed Breaking Bad there.
Right. I was recently in Albuquerque myself, I guess last fall, and oh man.
Oh yeah.
It's everything the show.
Like that's total tangent, but right. I mean that Albuquerque is like, you watch Breaking Bad, you've seen Albuquerque. Right. They're really not stretching things
not
there.
Hiding things at all.
Nope.
Yeah, and in fact, this podcast equipment made the trip all the way to Albuquerque as well too, where I interviewed Dr. Jeffrey Miller and Dr. David Lay. That was a very good time. In fact, Dr. Jeffrey Miller was the podcast episode number 1 for us. So anyway, so now you're rolling with your Game of Thrones account. The election's starting to gear up, and what happens, Jack? How do you go from tweeting about the Night's Watch and how bad the show sucks compared to the books.
I was way ahead on that, by the way. 2012, I was telling people the show sucked, and then it took everybody else until season 8 to understand
saying that.
I'm just saying.
One of my most popular Twitter threads in the last few months was my conclusion and summation of the show and how it was fantastic. The show was great. It ended. Starks won. And it was their redemption story about like not being naive and realizing that they gotta, wield their power because there's evil out there.
And I'm not saying that the existential narrative of the show was bad. I'm saying that the way they made the show was bad.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, the technical aspects.
Okay, well, let's not get too deep into that now. But I want to I want to hear the
transition. So, and it's intrinsically tied to that, right? So, 2016, the Game of Thrones show. Put it this way. If Game of Thrones hadn't started to suck so much, I probably never would have started a political Twitter account. Right? So
it's amazing how the world works.
And it's just true, though. And I go back to that and thinking about it all the time. Like, what if I had never, would I still be in the military? Would I still be doing that? So 2016 rolls around and I find myself on another deployment around the world, Asia Pacific. Trump's running. I like everything that's going on. Really appreciate it. Had gone to a couple of volunteer things with him in 2015 in the DC area, Northern Virginia area, and decided I wanted to get involved. But of course, Navy had other ideas, and he said, "No, we're going to send you over here." So I used to spend my free time, whether I was on a ship or whether I was on shore, when I was off duty, I would hop on to Reddit. And I would go on to actually Reddit the Donald, and I was helping out people back home because I'm out of Pennsylvania originally, and know a lot of people in Pennsylvania politics. And I found out all the people I knew who were running as Trump delegates, and I said, I want to help you guys volunteer. I want to get people going in. So I'm sitting there on the other side of the planet, volunteering for the campaign essentially through the internet and through social media. So that started taking off. Then I was doing it on my Facebook page as well, just putting out, volunteer content. And eventually I got contacted by a group called Citizens for Trump that said, hey, we understand that you're not really in the US right now. Are you going to be back? Are you going to come to the RNC? And I said, you know what? I actually will be arriving back. So I did a 6-month deployment, January through end of May. In 2016, I wasn't even in the country, and by that time I got back to the U.S. So I go to the RNC, and this is pivotal in the story, and we put together the biggest rally for Trump supporters that's outside of the official event. So we had about 1,000 people there on the lawn right at the banks of the river.
And how did you like organize and promote that?
Mostly through Facebook. Roger Stone was a headliner of it. We got Milo out there. Diamond and Silk spoke. Absolutely.
This was through Citizens for Trump?
Citizens for Trump, yeah. This is all Citizens for Trump, which is a volunteer effort. And that's eventually where, because Milo came, he introduced me to like Mike Cernovich and his whole crew that he had kind of rolling with him. So that's where I meet him. That's where I meet a bunch of other people. Jim Hoft. We then go to a party with Jim Hoft and meet more people there. And all through that time, I hadn't really been using my Game of Thrones Twitter account in 2016 because the show had become so diverted from the books, and that the books didn't really match up to the storyline because the books aren't finished yet. And so I wasn't really feeling the Game of Thrones blog anymore, and I was kind of checked out of it. And I was talking to all these guys about how I had this account. I had like 10,000 followers on it. And they said, you should just make a Twitter account for this stuff, for politics. You should just do that, And I thought about it and I said, yeah, okay, maybe I will. So about a week after the RNC, I can still remember when I went, and I went in and I deleted the angry GOT fan, and I wrote my real name on there and said, all right, I'm gonna drop that act, close off that blog, and now I'm just gonna go and be me.
That's amazing. So as of the summer of 2016, when the Republican National Convention is going on, you're helping promote rallies. You're there with Roger Stone and Milo. Imagine Alex Jones was probably even there.
Yeah, he came with that.
And I mean that you described the RNC to me once as the Woodstock,
Trump stock.
That's it. And for all of our guys who are in their 20s listening, they have no idea what that means, but that's okay. And so even at that time,
they'll read about it in history books.
You still haven't really fully utilized your social media at all. And now you've got one of the more powerful Twitter accounts in politics. So what happens? How do you go from 10,000 people who are listening to you because you're talking about the Night's Watch and turn it into almost 500,000, I don't know where you are right now, 500,000 ardent political supporters, plus also virtually all of mainstream media who keep up on what you're doing, et cetera, et cetera. How do you do that?
So we're kind of fast forwarding here a little bit, but and just to say it in a quick way, it was really going to the rallies on both sides, both Trump rallies and Hillary rallies. And then people forget about this, but they tried to downplay the idea that Trump had a lot of support. And going to those rallies and showing the sheer size, the crowd size of the pictures that I was seeing and posting those, people were saying, I'm not getting this anywhere else. I'm not getting this, because people would go, right, but they weren't posting it on social media. They were just, sharing pictures with their friends or sharing it on Facebook, which is more of like a closed sandbox environment, whereas Twitter's an open sandbox. That's a video game term.
Right.
So basically what it means is on Twitter, you can share something to everyone, whereas on Facebook, you're only sharing something essentially to people that you are friends and family with and already have a connection to. Yeah. So it's a closed network. And so by doing that on Twitter, it really got picked up. I eventually got sort of asked by Bill Mitchell if I wanted to be a co-host on his show in the early days.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, so that's my first like political media gig was with Bill Mitchell, and I was breaking down the story of the Access Hollywood weekend and how I had heard through the grapevine that they were trying to get Trump to actually step down that weekend. They wanted him to drop off the ballot, and Pence was going to be sort of anointed by Paul Ryan, who was going to fly out to Wisconsin, because they were both in Wisconsin on that weekend. And that was sort of my breakthrough story, at least. And I didn't even think about it as like journalism. It was just sort of a story that I had heard, and I said, well, I'm just going to tweet about this. So I did what amounted to a tweet thread in 2016, and that got really picked up. That got a lot of attention, going to rallies, going to Hillary rallies as well, and talking about it, and just sort of being along for the ride of 2016, people call it the Great Meme War that took place, and being in the fight.
Right.
And that all ends up with the Deplorable. By the time of the Deplorable, I've got about 50,000 followers. So Deplorable is sort of the end of 2016 in a way, the inauguration, even though it's actually in 2017.
Right, I never think of it,
but nobody thinks of it. Nobody thinks of it that way. It's the end of 2016. That was the victory. And then I got called by Rebel Media, actually, and Rebel Media reached out, and they had seen me because Lauren Southern was there covering it for Rebel, and I had given a speech at the Deplorable wearing a big white tuxedo.
I was just going to comment on that. You looked fantastic that night.
I look fantastic every night. But no, I wanted to make an impression, and so I came up with a big white tuxedo, and Rebel reaches out and says, "Hey, that was a great speech. You've got a great look. Have you ever thought about doing this full time?"
This is Ezra.
Yeah, Ezra Levant. And and I
actually this is the first time you'd ever contemplated politics / journalism / broadcasting, whatever we call this thing in the 21st century, as a gig.
Right, exactly. And at that time, I'm still in the intelligence community. I'm still working full time there. And I was looking at GS-13. For people who don't know what that means, GS-13 is kind of like you're sort of considered like fully vested, really great paycheck, really great benefits. I mean, you're locked in for life.
But that's outside of the military, no?
Right. That's on the civilian side.
And
so I'm looking at this and saying, I could sit in and stay in the corporate government world and keep climbing the ladder, or I could take a chance. I could take a chance and try to do something that could either be massively rewarding or, you know, a massive failure. And I think I'm still trying to figure that out. but Ezra was actually, I think he was really great about it. And over the course of a couple of weeks, we went back and forth, and I kind of ghosted him a little bit about it, actually, because it was, you know, it was a big decision. But probably what ended up making the decision for me was the fact that, so I just mentioned to you that so think about my 2016, right? I'm deployed 6 months, right? I'm gone. By the time I get back, it's election season. So the election in the fall happens. I'm working my job full time, spending my weekends, you know, quote unquote, fighting the meme war, and using up all of my built up, because I had a lot of leave time built up because I had done the 6 month deployment. So I'm spending all my leave time, all of my vacation time, going to events, going to debates, going and campaigning, going and, you know, just following the president and everything else, you know, all around the country. And I did not see, who a lot of people know is my now wife, Tanya, for almost that entire year, right? Almost until, I guess, November, right? You know, so the election ends in November. So
that's tough.
We got to a point where in our relationship where, you know, it was sort of like, it was kind of like a make or break point for us, where, because we had been dating throughout 2015, but then, hey, you're in the military, they say go, you go, right? You know, and 6 months apart, which ends up becoming 9 months apart. And I really was in this position where it was like, are we going to take this relationship to the next level, or am I just going to let it kind of atrophy and go off? And I sat there and looked at it and said, you know, I see these guys in, you know, sort of this specific subset of the intel community that I was in, where we're doing a lot of deployments and a lot of high op tempo, they would call it, operational tempo, and the guys who had done it for 10 years, for 15 years, for 20 years, and a lot of them looked miserable after climbing the ladder, you know, and a lot of them were divorced, their kids hated them, they didn't have great relationships with them, and yeah, you know what? They had done some really high-speed stuff. They had done some really cool things. They had gone on some great adventures. But at the end of the day, they're sitting there thinking, you know, at the end of the day, you're going to retire from the government, retire from military service, and they're just going to replace you with somebody else, right, in that community. And
I just I met with a captain, a career captain, a guy who actually was in charge of a destroyer, right? And he was talking
tin
about
can drivers.
He was talking about, we talked all about like why he didn't make admiral. Turns out a lot of politics involved in that.
Yeah, think.
Yeah, right. I was like, oh, you don't just earn that, and he literally just retired this year, and he's like, damn, you know, they really
what?
They do really replace you, and when they're done with you, they're really done with you.
Yep.
And then that's kind of it. And now he's figuring out like what to do next. And it's weird. The guy's in his late 40s or whatever, but he's like retired.
Right. Yeah, it's 20 and out.
Yeah.
For most people.
And the sense that I got from him, sort of, I don't want to say anger, but maybe a little bit of being just sort of forgotten after essentially what is a lifetime of service.
Yeah, and I'm sure he's highly decorated. I'm sure he's done fantastic service for our country.
Oh yeah.
But when that day comes and you pull the pin, I mean, you're just a number.
Right.
Right.
And even at that level I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Right?
Even at that level. Yeah. And, you know, I had kind of a mentor. Actually, when I was at Guantanamo, I had a guy who was my senior chief in E8. And he said to me, he said, Jack, look, at the end of the day, the Navy won't tuck you into bed at night.
Right.
The Navy's not going to be there for you when you retire. You know who's going to be there for you? Your family.
Right.
And
Jack Jr.
That had always stuck with me, you know, that him saying that had always, and the way he said it had always stuck with me. It's like he was the one guy who told me the truth. Right. Where everyone else, it's, yeah, you need the next rank, you need the next ribbon that you can get on your chest. There's an old, there's an army saying, they say, no, you never know how much a soldier will work for a piece of ribbon on their chest, you know.
Wow, that's amazing.
You know, to fight for that.
People respond to positive reinforcement in amazing and mind-blowing ways all the time.
And so what he said was, think outside the system. And actually, I was living, I don't live there now, so I guess I can say this, but I was living on Fort Meade where the NSA is.
Okay.
And one thing that struck me while living on that base was, while you lived there, you had a daycare center, there was a hospital, there was a high school, there was a college.
It's like a whole town.
And there was a graveyard.
Oh, the whole town.
And what struck me was that, you know, this is a closed loop. Right. This is a closed loop of your life. You start here, you're born, you go there, you do this, you join, you get out, you retire, and that's where you end up. And
it's kind of bleak.
It was kind of bleak. And I just didn't want that circle, that loop to be my life. And I had this incredible woman, you know, who did wait for me for all those 9 months. And the very first thing I did after the election ended was I said, I got to fix this relationship. I've got to go back to her and basically lay it out to her that way and say, look, I want to get serious with you. Do you want to get serious with me or not?
No.
And she did.
She did.
And it got to the point where I eventually said, well, then let's do it for real. And I got out. So I get out of the government service, get out of the intelligence community, take Ezra up on his offer. At that point, I think I had about 60, 70,000 Twitter followers. But within the first couple weeks of being at Rebel Media, I was their White House correspondent. I get verified. Getting verified, I mean, I'm
Changed
sorry.
everything,
You know,
yeah.
Twitter is a two-tier system. It really is.
Right.
I mean, it's like, you know, you're like a second-class citizen if you're not verified, and it's not fair. But getting verified, I mean, it doubled within the first couple of months, my following, and it's just been taken off ever since. And you know, now I'm at 490,000 right now, at the cusp of 500,000, I guess. And nobody tells you, right? Nobody tells you how to run an account like that. Nobody tells you how to go from being a nobody to a somebody. Nobody tells you how to, I don't know if I'm famous, but I have fame in a sense.
Oh my God, definitely. It's not fame like we remember growing up, where like fame meant everyone in the country knows who you are and you get mobbed on the street. But like Jack Posobiec, if you walk down the street, people are going to know who you are. People will call out to you. Dude, I have 25,000 followers. I was walking down the street the other day and somebody drove by and yelled out their car window, Jack Murphy.
I did actually just get recognized on the train this morning.
Yeah. No, I mean, it happens to me. So like, I know it happens to you. Plus, not only do you have like name or face recognition, like half of mass media, you know, people follow you. They've written articles about you. Like, they're paying attention. I mean, the people are paying attention. It's fame.
Yeah,
it's a new kind of fame, and it's not. I'm not saying this is like we're like bragging or anything, but it's in the context of you saying nobody tells you how to handle something like this. Nobody tells you how to go from quote nobody to somebody. Is that how you feel? Do you feel like you went from a nobody to a somebody? Not diminishing your prior, you know, self, but like,
well, my prior self was behind the curtain, right?
Yeah.
I was in shadow. I was the cloak and dagger world. You know, I couldn't be public, right? You know, when I was in the intelligence community, and now suddenly you're sort of thrust into this national limelight, warts and all, and you know, you're held to account for every single random thing you ever tweeted in your life or posted. And
I can't imagine what that must be like.
yeah, I know. And, well, no, I know, you know. And you can turn around and say, well, hold on, wait, you know, this was, you know, I was being sarcastic when I said this, or this wasn't meant to be taken seriously. What do you do? And they don't ask you, right? No, especially in this, you know, there's no context. And especially in this day and age where if you're someone who's, you know, on the pro-Trump side, there's all the incentive in the world that the media has to demonize you, to dehumanize you, labelize you and to, create this sort of like, it's kind of like being a zoo animal in some cases. You feel like when you're talking to some of these people, like, well, why did you do this? And we are now observing the natural Posobiec in his habitat. And it's like, no, guys, you can talk to me. Like, I'm on the level. Well, he claims this, but no, really. Like, I'm just talking. This is
and he's addressing us directly.
He's addressing us directly. Look at the look in his eyes. You can almost see sentient thought there.
Almost. Let's not get carried away, Jack.
Almost. Well, because and this not to get political, but this is because they have this ideology of evolved, heightened progressivism, and because they view as their political ideology as a form of evolution.
Correct.
And that if you are not at their level of evolution, then you're not. It's because you're resistant to it, or you're just not able to achieve the ascension that they have.
A lesser being.
Right. You're a lesser. Right. So you're a lesser being.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of like Aldous Huxley, right? There's the there's the beta plus majors, and then there's like the savages. So you're a savage.
Right.
Which is true in my case.
Well, a noble savage. No.
Absolutely.
A scholar and a gentleman. No. A king and a warrior. A poet. I don't know. A media star. A social media star.
Basically, if Marcus Aurelius was in 2019.
Jeez. No. Let's get carried away here.
No, Orson Welles.
So you go from, quote, being a nobody to being a somebody. You begin to wield real power, right? When was the first time that you realized that you had actual power in your fingertips and your thumbs and the phone and the Twitter app? What was the first time where, and good or bad, or on purpose or by accident, when was the first time you realized that what you had created and developed actually had real world power that could be utilized?
Probably it would be with the aspects, and I write about this in my first book, Citizens for Trump, which I named after the organization, the aspects of watching how we could come up with a hashtag. When I say we, I mean just Trump supporters on the internet in general, come up with a hashtag as a joke, as a meme, right? That hashtag goes to #1 trending on Twitter, and then candidates are being asked about that on the campaign trail about something that we had come up with as a joke or something that we thought was funny.
Right.
And now suddenly it becomes a narrative. Probably one of the biggest ones was Hillary's health, where we were attacked for it, we were mocked for it, and then it eventually proven right. About the questions about Hillary's health.
Right.
And it was kind of amazing to realize that. Oh, and then of course Trump winning, right? Trump actually winning the election, sort of being this huge underdog.
You putting that feather in your cap there?
Well, I'll put that feather in my cap in the sense that the work that we did, and I had so many people from the party, so many people from the community come up to me afterwards, especially in Pennsylvania, and say, you made it okay for me to realize I could like Trump. You made it, your example and the way that you were just relentless in your support, your advocacy, and stalwart in your beliefs, made me realize that if this guy can be out there publicly and taking the slings, the arrows, the shots across the bow from everywhere, right, the right, the left, the middle, and standing your ground, they said, if this guy can do it, then I can do it. And I think there was a really big Trump silent majority kind of thing. I think that's why his poll numbers were so depressed. That you may not say it publicly, but you're going to vote for him, you're going to vote for her. You say, oh yeah, I'll vote for him maybe. But in that booth, in that voting booth, in a lot of those states, they went with the way they went. And Andrew Breitbart used to talk about that. He used to say, walk towards the fire, and if you walk towards the fire, people will see you doing that, and they'll join you.
Interesting. So there were a couple of events that came to mind. I started thinking, a couple of ideas that came to mind as you're talking, which is you go from being like a social media hobbyist to being a social media professional. But, even though you got the job with Rebel and whatnot, the line of you going from a social media hobbyist to social media professional wasn't exactly like a stark change for you, right? Like, for example, if you're a nobody, you go to college, you go to journalism school, you come out of school, you go work at BuzzFeed, you start a Twitter account, you get verified, like boom, that account is your like professional like social media account, and everything, you know, theoretically that you put out on that account, you're saying should be judged professionally, should be part of my sort of canon, you know, my history, my political views, etc. And so there's a very stark dividing line between your private life and fun and recreation and whimsy, and then public life, professionalism, and seriousness. But for you, there was sort of like a gray, and for me too, and I'm still dealing with some of the ramifications of it. There's like a gray transition area, right? It's like,
yeah, exactly.
It's like I was saying those things because I was kidding, because we was just talking to my friends, because it was just for fun. This isn't like I didn't write a book about it. I didn't like research all of this. So like, do you?
Right. And
do
so
you
for
have
people,
that feeling
every day, every single day, especially when somebody brings up something that from that period of my Twitter account that I never meant for anyone to take seriously, because I was talking about with my friends or interacting with. For people who don't understand internet culture, meme culture, or just, you know, private conversations in a sense, right, in jokes, that to then try to take that and dissect that and piece that apart without actually talking to any of the people that are involved, it's impossible. It's frankly just impossible for someone to walk in as a separate entity and try to understand what's going on. And that's, I think a lot of Russiagate actually had to do with that, because you had these people who thought there was some sort of Tom Clancy novel going on, when really it's just, you know, kind of like normal business between, you know, Don Jr. and a couple of guys.
Right. Was there a moment that you can look back on where you're like, oh, man, I wish I wouldn't have done that, or I wish I wouldn't have said that, or I wish that came out differently, where you're being judged on the sort of blue check professional capacity, whereas, you know, this was your prior behavior or fun jack behavior or whatever? Is there anything that stands out to you?
So, and I know what you're getting at, but
I don't know what I'm getting at.
I think I know what you're getting at. And I think essentially that the biggest, and I will say this, my biggest regret in terms of social media and getting into the conservative media space, because I didn't intend to, right? It was an organic growth that happened over time.
Right.
So my biggest regret, and also my biggest piece of advice that I could give to people, if they are interested in getting into this space, is find your image first, and find your tone first, and find your brand first, and make that be a decision. Right. And then so everything that you then do goes back to reinforce your brand and to at least set your initial brand to be what you want it to be. So don't give people the opportunity to brand you as something else. And if you do that and you maintain everything around that initial brand, and here's the problem, right? The problem is that we live in this world where you could be somebody who is on a private account, who is, you know, not intending to be professional, but the media, it will dox you, they will target you, they will smear you, they'll slander you, they won't even ask you a question, right? And even if you're a private person, and they'll take everything you say in the worst possible light, and they will twist things that you have said, and that's sort of the Media Matters formula, twisting something.
Think Progress.
Yeah. Think Progress, founded by John Podesta. So, you know, take something that you've said and twist it into this funhouse version of the opposite of what you intended to say.
Right. I've had personal experiences with that for sure. Also experiences around what you're saying around branding. And now I think a year or two ago, me would gag at the notion of social media branding. But, you know, I think that we've all kind of can accept these days that social media, you can take an approach on social media that requires branding and requires brand management and brand care and forethought. And for someone like me and someone like you, whose social media experiences were deeply personal initially, and not around a certain brand idea or brand concept. There's a lot of risk involved in that, man. And it's like,
which is, it's interesting to think is because initially, right, when I did my Game of Thrones thing, that was a brand that was all thought out prior to, because I was doing a character, right? And so that there was a specific voice, there was an image,
angry Game of Thrones
guy. He's always screaming, he's always loud. That's me doing a character.
I see.
Versus me just joking around on the internet as myself.
Right.
And so understanding that you kind of have to come to social media in that same vein. And even if you're someone who thinks, well, I don't role play, I don't do characters, I'm very professional. Well, guess what? Like your version of whatever your personal perspective of what a professional is and what a professional should do, that's still a character, because you're not just quote unquote being yourself.
Right.
So that you're still playing a character, you're still playing a role. And this is why, personally, I think that my Twitter account, at least now, has been able to take off so much and be so successful, is because I've learned to become a self-actualized character, in the sense where I am myself.
Yes.
I can connect emotionally with my fans. I try to be as accessible and engaged as much as I can, with that many followers. But, I do a lot of AMAs. I do a lot of, hey guys, what do you think about this? I don't know what my take is. What's your, what's your opinion? And in doing so, you can be yourself more than this character. But at the same time, you want to maintain who you are and let that shine forward before the other side can kind of take things out of context and decide who you are.
Yeah. I remember early on, Mike Cernovich and I have known each other, holy cow, 2019, damn near 10 years now. And I remember when his Twitter account was first taking off. And even I would read it and I'd be like, what are you talking about? Are you talking about me? Who are you talking about? What is this? What's going on here? And he'd be like, dude, no, it's performance art.
Right.
And it took me a couple of years to even realize what that really meant. I mean, it really is performance art. And now
it's kayfabe. If you know, like pro wrestling, it's kayfabe.
Right. And now I have, I'm divorced, and I know that my ex-wife and some of her friends, they follow my Twitter account all the time. So like I'll get messages later like, oh, I can't believe you said that on Twitter. I'm like, it's all true, it's all real, but it's also not exactly real life too. It's like I would never just sit in front of a room full of people and just sort of act and talk that way. It's a very specific thing that happens on social media.
Right. And I think it's unfair to try to reduce someone to a tweet.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That I'm going to reduce. You tweeted this thing, and I'm going to reduce you to a tweet. That's not a person. That's a tweet. That's a thought. Twitter is the id, in many ways, right? And that's a part of someone. It's a part of thought, but it's not a totality, and it can't be. And hopefully, at some point, we'll, as a society, understand that our social media is an extension of us, but it's not all of us.
Right. Exactly. I am as authentic as I can be on social media. I think it's part of the attraction that people find to my account and to my storytelling. It's all 100% authentic and true, but it's curated. It's like sometimes you just wouldn't say things in that manner or at that time or for different purposes. And you can't judge a human being based on their Twitter account, which is what the world has come to at this point now.
I've always wondered, because I've had the experience of being profiled a few times by people on the left and by people on the right. And the one thing that journalists on the left, they always say to me after meeting me in person, or at least talking to me on the phone for the first time, they say, wow, you were so much more charming than I thought you were going to be. Or you were so different than I thought you were. And I'd love to, and I don't even know how you would do this, but I'd love to know what voice they read my tweets in their mind prior to knowing me, right? Do you think I'm screaming? Do you think I'm angry all the time? Because I'm in on the joke, guys, right? Everything, this is tongue in cheek, 100%. Everything I tweet comes with a little bit of a smirk, a little bit of a wink. Right. That's me, because that's me in real life too. And obviously there's serious moments, and you could be serious as well. But to think that I would just say all these things and be so incredibly serious and staunch about it all the time. No, that's how I am at all.
Yeah, and it's also just projection by the people who are reading it.
Precisely.
Too. Yeah, they want that to be like the defining moment of your whole entire life and the true single one definition of who you are as a human being. When I think people that aren't experienced on social media as creators, they don't understand that, like, in order to get engagement on social media, a lot of times you have to try 10 different things, and
what's funny is,
and then
so,
like 4 things hit, and you're like, oh, okay, now we'll go with those. Really
quick anecdote that just happened. So I happened to meet somebody I was at Turning Point, the Young Jewish Leadership Summit earlier this week. Great event, really good speakers. Happened to meet someone on the side, talking to him, and they knew who I was through Twitter and had never met me before, but we sit down, we're having coffee, and I say, so what, are you on Twitter then? They say, oh yeah. And I was happened to look at his account, and I could see that he's been on since like 2013, 2012, was a huge, World of Warcraft person, really into gaming. And all of a sudden it just clicked for me. And so like my normal sort of like wall kind of came down. It said, oh, so you get it. Like you get what Twitter is, because you've been on the platform for this many years. So you get, oh yeah. And so the level of our conversation rose to a new height, because we both realized that we were talking to someone who was sort of, of the same group, who had the same experience,
right,
who knew that it's Twitter, it's not real life. So it was really interesting to get to know that person, who can talk Twitter, and also who understood what Twitter was like before 2016.
Right, totally changed. Right? And I don't even know. I mean, I only got on in 2015.
Yeah,
so it was already kind of. It was like right before it all started.
Well, you got that. So 2015 was like the start of the culture war.
Yeah,
right. The culture, like Gamergate, I guess, was the beginning. I had nothing to do with that, but that was where it started bubbling up. And then 2015, the culture war exploded across the entire platform.
Right.
Then in the middle of 2015 is when Trump, comes down the escalator, and it goes on from there.
Right.
Right. So prior to that, I mean, Twitter was just like, I mean, it was just nonstop comedy. It was nonstop messing with people, post funny memes, joke around. There's this one viral tweet somewhere around there where someone goes, I can get banned for just saying hi to my friends, but back in 2011, somebody taught me how to make crack in my microwave on Twitter.
Right. I mean, that's a interesting phenomenon that has taken place. Trump's candidacy and presidency certainly changed social media forever,
because Twitter was and social media was so ubiquitous to his rise and to his victory.
Yeah, part of the whole experience. Social media doesn't always bring positive things. Sometimes it brings negative things and negative experiences. And sometimes you have to go out into the real world and try to figure things out for yourself. We were talking about this before we started recording, and you were starting to tell me about the time that you actually went to Comet Pizza for dinner. Now that's a confluence of the real world, social media, news, fake news, politics, all of it sort of coming together. So Tell me about that. Why did you go? What happened? And what happened afterwards?
Absolutely. So
Comet Pizza.
Had heard about this trending hashtag, right? There was a hashtag that was trending with regards to this restaurant, and it was sort of towards the end of the election, and quite frankly, at the time, I had no extra time to care about it or understand it or learn about what it was, because I had an election to win, and that was my focus. I was very mission focused. And I remember a guy I knew at the time, and I'll talk to anymore, had said, hey, you got to check this out. You got to check this out. And I'm like, this is weird. I have no time for this.
Check what out? What out?
The hashtag. And it went back to some emails in the WikiLeaks regarding John Podesta. And somehow there was a linkage that brought it back to this restaurant. And I just sort of blew him off and said, look, I have no time to get into this right now.
Do you know where the linkage came between Comet Pizza and the Pizzagate hashtag?
At this point, yeah, but at the time, no.
Bro, what was it?
It had to go with a certain reading of John Podesta's emails that suggested that there was a secret code being used between himself and a group of people, which centered around essentially this restaurant.
Right.
And so,
And that's just because they like frequented this restaurant or whatever. Like I've been to Comet Pizza. Like it's by my house. My kids have been there. I take my kids
yeah,
there.
there was like a fundraiser there.
I've had a great pizza there with like this goat sausage and goat cheese, or lamb sausage and goat cheese.
Oh, wow.
It was amazing. But so it's all in the email. So there's a linkage. And do you know where the linkage, like who made the linkage between the pizza place and whatever code? Did this come out of 4chan, or where did this come from?
It was a 4chan thing. Yeah, it was a 4chan thing.
Got it. So you decided you were just going to go down there and check it out?
So afterwards, right. So afterwards, after the election, a couple weeks go by and people are still talking about this thing. And so I was already doing these. So I use an app a lot called Periscope. I still use it. And whenever I go around DC, whenever I'm at something or at an event, I'm at a concert, whatever I'm doing, I throw up a Periscope and I say, here's where I am, here's what I'm doing. And I try to be entertaining and try to explain what's going on to people. And I had a basic understanding of what people thought about this restaurant. And I thought, well, this is ridiculous. You guys think that this is some kind of like, to me, it seemed like, because I'm from Philadelphia, right? And it seemed like one of those places that sort of just, it's kind of like the art scene, type of place where, yeah, it might seem weird if you're not part of that circle, if you're not part of that scene, you may not understand it. But to me, it just seemed like, well, I would say it was like a South Street, Philadelphia kind of restaurant. And so I said, well, it'd be funny. Why don't we just go down there for dinner some night and show people that it's just a regular pizza place, right? It's not a regular, or it's not involved in some crazy thing. And so we go there. I go with a friend of mine, and I've just got sort of a camera going in my pocket. I've just got the Periscope going in my pocket as we walk in, because I say, look, and in my mind, what's going to happen is, I can sort of plan these things out. I say, well, I'm going to go in, I'm going to order some food, we're going to sit around, we're going to show people that I guess there's some games there, some like game room, and then sit down, order our food, and then leave. And at the end, we'll say, well, guys, I guess we were wrong. I guess the internet was wrong on this one, leave it at that. So I proceed to sit down with my friend. He orders a beer. I don't drink. I ordered a garlic knot and a slice of pizza. By the time the garlic knot comes, the manager comes over and says, we'd like to ask you to leave. And I said, am I doing something wrong? He said, well, you're furthering this narrative that's out there about this place. And I looked at him, I said, no, I'm not trying to do that right now. I'm just showing people why are you going live? And it said, because I just always do that. It's something I always do. Like some people take pictures of their food. I go live on Periscope. And he motions to this police officer that's in the corner and says, you need to ask this guy to leave. And I said, okay. I'm refusing him service. I said, look, hey man, no harm, no foul. That's your choice. I completely understand where you guys are coming from. I'm going to go. Right. So I leave.
So was there like a conflict, or was the tensions raised, or did you protest or anything? Or?
I mean, at first I said, well, why am I being asked to leave? Did I do something wrong? Have I offended someone? I was sitting there about to eat my garlic knot,
Right.
And essentially it was this live stream, and the live stream was just titled "Dinner at Comet Pizza," right? It's no, furtherance of any kind of
No other hashtags on there?
No.
Okay.
And afterwards, I get asked about this by the Washington Post. They reach out to the Washington Post and get this story going about it.
The Comet Pizza people.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they claim that I was in there like harassing people and chasing children around, and none of which, I mean, you can watch the video. It's none of which I had done, right? And they said that, we had to kick this guy out because of what he was doing and all this. And I said, I ordered food. I think I was doing what everybody else was doing. And then Washington Post calls me and asks for comment. And the first thing I said was, look, I think that what's being done to this place, you can go back and read the article. I think what's being done to this place is the same thing that was done with Iraq with WMDs and all these other hoaxes that have gone on. I think it's a hoax that people are spreading lies about this place. And I thought that by, possibly, going there with a friend and just showing people that it was a regular place, that it would help to end that hoax, sort of debunk that hoax. obviously it didn't turn out the way I intended, right? So that sort of was the narrative, and that ended, right? 2 weeks later or so, I think everybody knows what happens after that. There's a shooting. Some guy, Edgar Madison Welch, drives up from North Carolina, rushes in, screaming, yelling, takes a shot, comes out, is arrested, right? Terrible, horrible situation. Something that you obviously don't want anything to happen with. Don't know if you saw my video. I've never been able to find any evidence that this guy had a Twitter account, so I don't know how he would have seen my video. But of all people, Megyn Kelly, on December 15th, 2016, date I remember because it's my birthday, goes on and claims that I radicalized this guy to do what he did. Doesn't ask me for comments, doesn't ask me to come on to defend myself, doesn't even try to get things from my perspective that, no, actually it was the opposite. I was trying to debunk that so that people like this wouldn't do things like this, to just show people that it was a regular place where you could walk in and order a meal and then leave. And she plays my video, right, with the sound off. And so she's putting words into my mouth. And this is Fox News, right? So they put words into my mouth. They put a lower third under there, and all of these things. Then she brings on the owner, who's repeats his false story about me that I was harassing people and chasing children, and suddenly the world is turning on people like me, and not just people like me, but turning on me in this instance and saying, why did you do this? Why would you ever do this? And I'm trying to kind of scream into the ether that this is the opposite of what I was doing. And if anything, they said, well, what about when you said this? I said, guys, that was satirical. I'm making fun of the people who and actually one of the organizations I work with, an Open Secret, run by Gabe Hoffman, they've done a lot to expose child sex abuse in Hollywood as well as in other industries. They focus mainly on Hollywood though. And one of the things I asked him once, because we've worked together for years now at this point, I've helped him share stuff, I've had him on my show, One American News. I said to him that, were you ever worried about working with me because of this narrative that's out there? And he said, Jack, I watched your video. It was obvious what you were trying to do. And even with half a brain would know you were making fun of people who believed that, and you were just trying to sit down and have a regular meal. I said, okay, so I'm not, because they make you feel like you're insane, right? They try to make you feel like your own words don't match with your feelings and your intentions, and that the things that you say don't matter because what they think about you matters. And so that everything you say and every piece of evidence that you can provide is wrong somehow, or is not to be taken at face value because their narrative is taken at face value. So yeah, I've been a victim of fake news. I've been a not the worst one that's ever happened. It's something that I have to fight. It's something that still, people in very bad faith bring up and try to tie me to, which is a situation that I really had nothing to do with, but actually something that I was trying to prevent. And I think that people really don't understand that because, again, they don't understand internet culture. They don't understand meme culture, that this is something that I was hoping would not happen, and that I was hoping that I would be able to put these accusations to rest by showing the wide internet community that there was nothing to be found here. That, yeah, maybe, John Podesta is a liberal and Hillary and all this other stuff, but this restaurant has nothing to do with it.
Do you think that you'll ever be able to grow past that sort of scandal? And how much time will it take? Do you think you'll ever be able to put in enough high quality, not to say anything else was low quality, but consistent, professional, I use air quotes, quality material and output, like writing a couple of books and hosting an interview show on a news network, and being a legitimate communication specialist? Are you ever going to be able to grow past that in the eyes of some people?
Well, it depends on the people, right? There's always going to be people who, and as I said, they operate in bad faith. There's always going to be people who say, I don't believe you. I think you're lying. I think you believed in all this stuff. I think you did this. And at that point, yeah, essentially you got people who think they can read minds, you know. They got people who think that they're just projecting again what they think of you onto you. And so there will always be people who are naysayers, there will always be people who attack, but those people by and far have been getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And essentially I've noticed that it's just political at this point. It's really just political. And I've since then, and since that time, President of the United States has retweeted me 4 times. I've been was Rebel Media for a while, now I'm One American News. And I think over time, when you create and continue that consistent record of day in and day out being on the grind and showing people who you are and maintaining that brand,
right,
that, you know, having the family that I have and showing them out there, that when they try to throw these, you know, you're a tinfoil guy, they try to throw this stuff at you. But when I'm showing people on a daily basis who I am and the work that I'm doing, it becomes very hard for those smears to stick. It becomes very hard for those attacks to land, those punches to land, because it creates a cognitive dissonance almost for the people saying them, because people can see with their own eyes who I am, what I'm about, the life that I live, the work that I do. I'm very, very, very open and transparent about who I am.
Right.
And when people try to smear me and slander me, it doesn't stick as much because of that openness and transparency. And, you know, it is something that I think about, though. You know, would I be so transparent with photos of my family, photos of my son, if it wasn't for this situation? But I'll never know. I'll really never know what it's like, because in order for me to maintain that, there's no other way to do it.
I've had to deal with some of the same things where people paint you as the opposite of what you are. Like, people have painted me as some sort of rape advocate. I don't even know what that means. Like, I'm running around telling people that they're supposed to, you know, rape other people. I mean, it's insane. I have been critical of radical feminism and use satire and irony to make them look as stupid as possible. And then people take your satirical comments and twist them all up.
Right.
And
satire, sarcasm, irony, you know, those things are never ascribed, because, again, we are lesser beings. We are savages, right? So you couldn't possibly know how to use an intellectual tools such as those. So you must be taken at face value.
Right, exactly. You're just a literal barbarian. So and our friend Mike Cernovich also has obviously experienced a lot of the same things, and he's told me in the past, he's like, yeah, you know, just day by day, you just put more ground between yourself and those things, those sort of malicious scandals that came out of nowhere and fabrications. And so, you know, eventually one day, maybe that'll just fade into the background, except for the people who specifically only want to murder your character. And those people then are just self-selected and identified as like your absolute they chose you as their enemies. And so anybody with half a brain and who pays attention to your work now and has ever met you personally is never going to, you know, ascribe any of those silly things to you as some of those writers and sort of bad faith actors have out there. But it does bring up an interesting question, which is, do you have different responsibilities as your profile grows larger? For example, when you're just trying to get discovered in this cacophony out there, sometimes playing it straight is not the way to discoverability. You have to be loud, you have to be obnoxious, maybe you have to say crazy things, you have to create conflict maybe where there wasn't conflict before. You know, it's the performance art aspect we were talking about. But as your platform grows and your power grow, and I don't mean that in a malicious way, I just mean your impact on people, does your responsibility evolve as well too? Does Jack Posobiec today have a different responsibility than angry Game of Thrones fan or even nascent, you know, Jack P from summer 2016?
Well, it depends on what you want out of your social media, right? It depends on what you want out of that and what you want out of life. In the way I approach it these days, yes, I do take responsibility for everything that I tweet. Since I've had that blue check mark, kind of the formulation we were talking about before, everything since then is something I take full responsibility for. And I'm putting myself out there as this is me, this is who I am. You know, look, a tweet is not the same thing as a professional video that I'm doing for One American News. So understand that, yes, I'm still sarcastic. I'm still satirical. I try to be funny, right? I post memes. But there is a responsibility in terms of your impact on the world. And that's why since 2017, actually June of 2017, one of the biggest things that I've advocated for is, or advocated against, I should say, is political violence, and taking a stand on the side of peace, and saying that if we are ever going to sort of end the culture wars and get back to a time in our society where we can just talk to each other, and the tribalism and the sort of like just warfare that's going on, at least in the cyberspace, that occasionally translates into the physical space, that we need to stand against political violence of all stripes. Doesn't matter what side you are, red, blue, green, white, black, etc., that we should all agree that political violence is wrong. I mean, you look at things like the Russiagate shooting. You look at this guy traveled across half the country, right? Came from Illinois to Virginia, waited for a month living in a YMCA with like one pair of clothes, waiting for Steve Scalise and other congressmen and senators. Jeff Flake was there, Rand Paul was there, to open fire at them with with an SKS rifle, because he thought that they were Russian operatives of some sort, right? So where's the responsibility for, MSNBC and Rachel Maddow? Where's the responsibility of them saying, we shouldn't have done as far as we did on this? We shouldn't have taken these accusations at face value. We should have tried to mitigate or diffuse situations before it got to the point where somebody actually thought that because of our words, that these group of people, Republican congressmen, but American congressmen, right, regardless of politics, that they were somehow enemies that needed to be taken out, as James
assassinated,
right, as James Hodgkinson believed. And that's why even to this day, right, we held an event in June of 2017 standing against racism, standing against violence, standing up for peace, and saying that if you want to agree to a basic set of rules, then the first thing you have to say is political violence is wrong. And I would encourage everybody out there within the range of my voice, out there in the community, and I probably tweet it about once a week, that we need to be a peaceful people, that we cannot stand for political violence. This is why just last week when DC Antifa was posting posters around Washington with Tucker Carlson's home address on them, with Stephen Miller's home address on them, that I absolutely called this out. I raised this to Twitter, and Twitter actually did respond and suspend Antifa DC's Twitter account because they were even posting their address online and saying that people should shut them down. Well, if Antifa is saying shut them down, and you're posting the address, then yeah, that's incitement for violence. Right. And essentially, the definition that I learned of in the military is, if you're trying to use violence to achieve political ends, and there's a word for that, it's called terrorism. That is the tactic that you are attempting to use.
Right. Well, I do appreciate that message. I was at that protest rally thing in 2017 across the street from the White House against political violence. As somebody who has experienced sort of, it's not physical violence, but the network mob attack, the doxing, the banning, the getting fired, the shaming, all that, the exile. I can totally appreciate this idea that we need to not use violence or network warfare even as an equivalent to achieve political means. It did feel personally to me like a terrorist attack, like these people swooped out of nowhere. They tried to ruin my life. And so I really do appreciate that message. And I think that that's a good note for us to wrap up this podcast on. It's been 2 hours of fantastic material. I really, really, truly appreciate you talking to me. And if for guys, members of the Liminal Order, our men's community, we're going to have a little exclusive session right afterwards. But Jack, where can people find you? What's the name of your book that people can buy, and how can they best interact with you out there in the world today?
Yeah, so I think everybody knows I live on Twitter, Jack Posobiec, JackPosobiec. Ramping up my Instagram game, getting my Instagram game on point now, so follow me there as well. A lot less politics there, more pictures, more cultural stuff. A lot of Game of Thrones, Marvel movies, criticism that goes on there. Star Wars, of course, is I consider myself a recovering Star Wars fan. And then also, of course, if you have cable, One American News, absolutely love the network. I love what we're doing. I love the fact that when you turn on One American News, you don't get screaming, you don't get shouting. We don't do the panels of outrage all the time. what do? We sit and give people news packages in digestible, 2 to 3 minute chunks. You're getting about 15 stories an hour. If you're someone who cares about efficiency, if you care about your time, and you don't feel like just being outraged all the time, turn on One American News. You will get more stories, more bang for your buck in terms of time, and you won't have that emotional baggage that comes around with any of the other 3 cable networks.
That sounds fantastic. Thank you again, Jack. Also, everybody out there, check out my website, jackmurphylive.com. If you want to learn about the liminal order, go to jackmurphylive.com/liminal-order. And check us out there. Get up on the waiting list. The membership is closed right now here in late June, but we will be opening up membership again sometime in the next couple of months. So get on the wait list. There's a lot of guys in liminal order right now are already having such a great time and really getting high value out of everything. And in fact, one of the high value things that they're going to get is a little private one-on-one question and answer session with Jack Posobiec right after this. So again, go to Jack Murphy Live, check it out. Jack Posobiec. Thank you so very much. We'd been meaning to do this for a while, and it went a long time coming. It went super well. And again, thank you very much.
Thanks, man.
All right. Yeah, go for it. All right, I'll hit pause on this, and I'll queue up the questions, and then we'll.